Welcome back, everyone. And for those of you that weren't able to attend the 101 workshop, welcome to Global Entrepreneurship Week, Sacramento 2020. We're really excited to have you all here, and just such a pleasure to have Josh Levine here to take us through another workshop on culture. And I think he mentioned we might have some 201s and 202s coming up
in the future.
But no, we had a great session on the 101. And if you weren't able to access that earlier, we can definitely share on our web pages later, so you can access that content to build that foundation for this 102 workshop. But jumping in, this workshop is going to take us a little bit deeper into those 6 components of culture, and really help you as a participant to begin to really think about your company's values and have some hands-on exercise and really approaching that. So we're going to look at the importance of values, what a great recognition program looks like, and how to uncover your company's values. So I want to start just by introducing myself. My name is Cameron Law. I'm the interim executive director of the Carlsen Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Sacramento State. And I also serve as the Sacramento organizer for Global Entrepreneurship Week. And then I also wanted to recognize that I am on the board with Culture Lab X here in Sacramento, which Josh Levine was the founder. And we also have one of our fellow board members, and I believe she's our chair, Bree Cahill. She's here as well. So I give you the virtual wave, and good to see you here. And she's done some amazing work in the Sacramento ecosystem and Bay Area and beyond. So we're excited to have her in this space. But for those of you that don't know, the Carlsen Center serves as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable students and startup founders of all backgrounds to explore and start their businesses. At the end of the day, we really are on this mission to make innovation and entrepreneurship pervasive throughout the greater Sacramento region, with this steadfast vision to become the premier hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I just wanted to provide a little context for this week. It's been a tremendous week already. So we're on day 3 of Global Entrepreneurship Week. And we really want this week to serve as an on-ramp into the entrepreneurial journey, and really build some connections for you to start your businesses or feel that inspiration to take some next steps on those ideas that you've had, and really see the Carlsen Center, but also the Sacramento region as a resource for you, helping and mobilizing your business. And so I'm just super excited to jump into this second workshop with Josh, and I'll hand it off on over to you, and we'll get started with the workshop. So thanks for being here again.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you for the first time. I won't go through a big introduction this time around. What I thought we would do is talk about values, go a little bit deeper into values this time. For those of you who did not attend 101, very quickly, my name is Josh Levine, author of a book called Great Mondays, and also co-founder of Culture Lab X, a national organization for the exploration of culture, and also president of Great Mondays, same title, agency, culture design agency here in the Bay Area. So these are the 6 components of company culture, and what I want to do is dive into the one that I think gets the most attention and needs the most attention, because there is a lot of organizations that have values, but they aren't very effective. And they're not effective because I feel like they were created without a complete understanding of what they are really meant to do. And the short answer is to guide behaviors. But let's take a look at some what makes for a good value, and then talk a little bit about some examples. And then I want to take you through an exercise for creating your own values or discovering your company's own values. All right, so values are shared beliefs about what's most important when conducting business. There are guardrails for those behaviors. So how do we do what we do? So good values are brief, well-defined, unique, limited in number, and actionable. The headline is brief. It's something you can remember easily. Well-defined means everybody is clear about what it is we are talking about. Unique means they are different from other people's values. There's a big opportunity here to really create a differentiated offering when we're thinking about an employer value proposition, as well as how we act. They're limited in number. I don't want you see you going off and having a list of 12 values. That's not okay. Deciding what your values are is an exercise in prioritization. What is most important? If everything's important, nothing is. So my strong opinion is that you can have 3 to 5 values. And finally, they're actionable. So don't just tell me what it is, tell me what I'm supposed to do, how I'm going to do it. We looked at these before, so let me go into another example and show you a values framework. So this is something that we created at Great Mondays. This is the breakdown of all the things that you need to have on a single page values description. So what we call it, the name, the summary, what are the 3 short hits that summarize that value, what we mean, the intent and idea behind that value, what do we do, behaviors that activate that value, and finally, what do we ask, guiding questions that help that decision. So here's an example of a 1-page value. We value unconvention. This is the one I mentioned previously. It's a made-up word, but that's great because that's exactly what this is about taking smart risks and questioning the status quo. So you've got your 3 quick hits about what it might be, and then what we mean when we're talking about unconvention, and what we do, what are the behaviors. So what we mean here says we dare to reshape the world and invent a better future. We challenge convention, freeing ourselves from what is to imagine what might be. In the process, sometimes we fail, but that's good as long as we learn from it. What we do, our favorite questions are how might we and why not? We're always seeking new ways to improve how people find and share work. To do this, we take smart risks, knowing that if it doesn't work, we're still one step closer to success. So that's how you get everything onto 1 page. Here's another example from a nonprofit that we did work with, Him for Her. So essentially the goal, Him for Her is a nonprofit to help more women get on boards. And we worked with them to define their values. And these are the 3 values of theirs: stay gold, take flight, go deep, right? So this isn't collaboration and integrity. This is uniquely them. So stay gold is an articulation of this idea of possibility, identify possibility, lift, it's supposed to say lift everyone up. Take flight, move it forward, seek impact, and go deep, big, rigorous, and listen. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into this one. Here's our single page values framework. We've got the title, Stay Gold. So that's something that's catchy and I can remember and feels very much like them. If you noticed on the Him for Her page, gold is their brand color. So identify possibility, lift everyone up. So we've got some quick hits. What do we mean? There's no doubt that we can and will change business for the better. We lead with a positive spirit, believing we can achieve our mission without closing the door for others. So that's when we stay gold, that's what it means. What are some examples of what we do? What would this look like in action? We create positive experiences. We assume the best intent. We raise our voice without diminishing others. We work with men as allies, be selective about partners and donors, and stay true to our vision, not other agendas. When we were working with them, there was quite a bit of leveraging of this when there was an opportunity to contribute to an article that for the New York Times that I think would not have, it was about the Me Too movement, but it felt inappropriate for them to step forward and say it at that point. So they used that sort of raise our voices without diminishing others and work with men as allies. And they decided that it wasn't their place to step in and deliver a quote for that article. And then this one has our what we ask. And usually what we try to do is single it down to 1 question. Sometimes you can have more. So when you're taking action based on your value, ask these questions to assess whether you're actually reflecting this. Is this a win for all sides? Does this align fully with our vision and strategy? Are we bringing our best selves? So what I will say is that the hard part about values work is actually really learning how to embed it into each of the behaviors that you have. And part of this is practice, and part of it is the implementation or the application of the what we do to your personal experience. So here you can see the level of description of the action is much more it's a higher level. It's a general description, create positive experiences. Now, what does that mean to you individually? It could be all sorts of things. And so me as a receptionist at this business is going to be creating a different kind of positive experience than someone who's the CEO or a manager or a partner. And so that's what you want to create is this ability for variability to project into, set the boundaries and be able to allow for people to project into those behaviors, what they can achieve, what they will do. All right, I'm going to show you another example, some values that we created for PagerDuty, real-time operations organization. Here's their 5 values. Champion the customer, take the lead, run together, act and own, and bring yourself. So they've got their little quick hits down below, but that's not the entirety of it, right? That's a way of articulating it quickly. But what we need to do is make sure everybody's on the same page. Only once you have that explanation, that narrative, and you educate people, people become not just aware, yes, there are values, understand, oh, okay, I know what you mean, but be able to integrate it into decision-making that they make. Then you can say, you can just say, hey, don't forget, take the lead, right? Because at that point, take the lead encompasses all that meaning. So that's what you need to do in order to be able to articulate this in a briefer way. So here's this example. Same framework. So act and own. So what this means is acknowledge and own. See opportunities, make it yours, do right. So we have here, I won't read it again, but what we mean, what we do, what we ask. So we can read the what we ask. How am I accountable for our work and my actions? So when I'm making this decision, if I want to activate this value in my head, this is the question I'm going to ask. That's the entry point for me. All right, awesome. So I guess maybe I'll pause here for a moment and see if there are any questions that pop up for people. I'm happy to take questions throughout, but if there are any questions about what makes for a great value or how to activate that value, I could definitely pause here if you want to ask something. The next thing we'll do is we'll start to get into the exercise, and I'll describe how you can start to create your own values.
So yeah, so feel free to throw in the chat if you have any questions, or if you currently have a question and want to just unmute yourself, feel free to ask away. And if not, then we will continue on.
All right, jump in.
So we got one that came in. So where can we search for values if we don't have an idea? So what would that process of building them, where would you start?
All right.
Obviously,
well,
right here.
Let's do it. Let's get into it. All right. So again, these are, this is an exercise that I have both in the book and on my website, greatmondays.com, and you can just select Culture Classroom. There's a bunch of exercises that you can download. What I'm going to do is take you through this, this exercise, and values are, again, what I've said previously, right, is it's an exercise in prioritization. And so we have to kind of work from the end back. And so what I tell my clients to do, or what I help them do, is think about your culture all-stars. And specifically in this exercise, choose 2. So if you have, and I'll get to but it's just me and my co-founder. We could talk about that in a second, but let me go through this and then we can scale it down. What you want to do is you want to think about a person who represents kind of the best of your company. A person whom if you could replicate, it would be kind of the ideal culture. That's what you want. You want to kind of go with your gut feeling. You're like, oh, totally, it's Stacy, right? All right, so now let's think about why. So I want you to cite 3 behaviors, and I'll go even more specific, 3 instances, 3 times where they did something that you felt was like, you're like, perfect, that's exactly what we want to happen at this company. I'd love for other people to do the same thing. So start with those instances. What are the behaviors? It could be a repeated behavior. It could be something that, let's say Stacy always comes in the morning and she makes sure to say hello to everyone, even when she's not feeling great. And that might be exactly what you want to replicate. You want other people to have to do. Once you have those three, then I want you to think about, and it doesn't have to be that short, pithy title. I want you to describe what value drives that behavior. What does it mean they value when someone comes in and is always connecting with people and smiling and saying good morning? What does that mean? Is it a willingness to go beyond yourself? Is it something about connecting with others? Is it about building relationships? It's up to you to determine, right? All three of those totally are true or right for that instance. And that is going to be what we call a value theme. So a value theme is going to be a description of a value. It's not the title, it's not the perfect thing, but it's like starting to get there. I think this goes right to that question, which is, how do you figure out what your value is? And so I want you to just write as much as you need to describe what that might be. Value theme in that on your paper or on your computer. That's how you're going to start to get there. And then once we have value themes, we can, and this is what, when I work with my team of copywriters and creatives to actually pull, and strategists to pull that out and think about how we might title that or how we might think about that. Then that's when we start to be able to articulate that on that one page, what we might say, what it might be called, what are the hits, what are we trying to describe? But this is the starting point. This is the starting point. Now, if you are one of those, if you're a solopreneur, or it's just a few people on your team, or you simply can't think of a culture all-star, what you can do instead is think about a character, alive or dead, real or fiction, that you respect, that you think represents your company in some fashion. So could be John Wayne, Michelle Obama, Harry Potter. These are all examples of characters that are going to be stand-ins for your all-stars. And then you can go through exactly the same process. What's the behavior and what do they value? So we're starting from either way, right? All-star or famous person, you're starting from a gut place of like, this person feels right. This person, if I had a lot of these people working at my company, this is exactly what we would want. And that way we can kind of get to that intuitive place. And then you can start to interrogate exactly what each of those things are. So let's see.
We had a couple of questions come in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so the first question was, can I or should I build values before I have a company? So very, very early stages, 1 to 2 team members at this point.
I do think it's important to, and this is what we got into at the end of the last session, which is at that point, when you are an independent individual, it is important to establish those. They're going to be your values, your individual's values. And that's great. That's going to continue with you for a while until you get enough people to kind of, that you want to grow beyond yourself. You want to think about your values and your culture beyond what you are. As a leader, even if you don't write them down, your company's run by the values that you either knowingly or unknowingly articulate. And so I'm in favor of, let's figure out what it is that I stand for and I want to move forward with, so that I can make a decision. I can decide, do we want to move on from this or not? And even as important as actually identifying it for the moment, that way when you go forward and you actually have more people and you want to reevaluate your values, you can say, oh, this is where they were. This is what they were when we started. How are we different now? And that's going to help you understand what's shifted and what's evolved.
I love that. That makes me think back to when we're talking about companies as an organism, right? If we even think of ourselves,
Right.
your values as a 10-year-old to then when you're a 25-year-old to then when you're older than that, right? Your values might have shifted just as an organization's would, as you have more learnings and more things that meet more people that influence that change. So the next question is, should a business's top priority be looking after their bottom line or caring for the members of the business's culture?
Can you read it again?
Should a business's top priority be looking after their bottom line or caring for their members of the business's culture?
Why not both? Culture is a long-term solution to improving bottom lines and experiences, caring for those people. So it's not a either or it shouldn't be. When I'm thinking about culture, when I'm talking about culture and managing culture, it is both a tool to improve the work lives of people, but also the end result is a better business. They're going to make better decisions. They're going to be able to be more informed. You won't have to be as tight of a micromanager, and you're going to enable them to do their best work when implemented correctly. So I challenge the premise of the question, and that it might be either or. It's not. It's both. I think the tension comes when thinking about timing. So culture is a long-term business investment. This is, and the immediate, there are immediate benefits, but I think that the challenge will be, should we allow people to have a little more time to be more flexible, or do we make sure everybody's like, we're squeezing every last minute out of them to make sure that we're delivering for our clients? So I think that's the challenge, and that's what you have to balance as you get bigger, or as you start small and get a little bigger. It's like, how do you establish, what are the inexpensive ways to start to establish your culture? The sooner you do it, the less expensive it'll be in the long run. So it's just a matter of like, what do we do now? How do we get people to start making better decisions, establishing our purpose, spending that time to determine what it is that we want our organization to be?
Awesome. So this will be the last one. I think we can continue on. Should values of the large organization be translated into behaviors/actions of the individuals, departments, offices to make them their own? And I will provide some context. She is part of Sac State University. So I think just thinking of like a huge institution like a university, how do we look at values across that?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, you think about multinational organizations. So if you have an office in Chicago and one in Hamburg, the way those things are going to come to fruition are going to be very different. I do think that was kind of what we were discussing before, which is the value needs to be specific enough that we understand what we're talking about, but broad enough that you can interpret it and deliver on the intent of that value. And so the answer is yes, it should be able to be interpreted for individuals and their roles, for organizations, for groups and schools or offices. What that looks like is going to be different for everybody, as long as it's delivering on that intent. That is going to be the right way to consider how a value starts to look in the behaviors, what it looks like in edits, how you can adjust based on those. So here is an example of having filled it out. We have, I filled it out for Erica, who's a real person. She's a woman that I work with. So behaviors, 3 examples. She made an effort to understand and connect with David, and that David's the client. And then I would say that the theme for that one, what is driving that? She wanted to create a deep bond with a client. That was something that was important to her, and it really helped the success of that project. Number 2, advocated for hiring Lev, a new subject matter expert. So what was she doing? Looking for and experimenting with ways to improve processes. She was saying, I think we're doing okay, but we need to do better. I think we could, if we brought Lev on, it might help us. Number 3, found a compromise between over delivering and giving away unpaid work. So something we always want to do at Great Mondays is over deliver, and we want to over promise and over deliver. What this one was really about for her was staying true to her strengths, which is doing great work while stretching her thinking. So how might we be able to, go beyond ourselves or go beyond what we understand in order to determine what is and isn't going to be appropriate to deliver. So we then turn those into 3 values that we came up with for Great Mondays, with, not for. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is we work with our client, not for our client. And so that's an example of that. Staying fresh, so ways to experiment and improve processes. So we're always looking for never getting too stale in our process. And then another one we came up with, harmonicity. And so how do we bring concepts together and in a way that is both honest, good for everybody, but also in, connecting with the bigger picture. So that's an example of how that came to fruition for us. I told that story before, which I could, I'll tell you what, here's what I'd like to do now is I want to move us over to the culture canvas, and we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to stop my share and change the screen. And here in the chat, I have an example. I have the link to the culture canvas. And so I'm going to pull that up as a share. So created the culture canvas last year, is a 1-page version of all the 6 components. You can see it here on the screen. You can find this on our website as well as on our Medium page. And we have both a PDF, which is what we originally started with. That's what you're looking at here. And then this past year, over the summer, I created an interactive version of this. So this is the reason why I started thinking about this is like, how do we actually document what we're doing in a single page? I love single page ideas. And one of the challenges that emerged from the pandemic is nobody's together. How do we do this? How do we do this as we're apart? So what I created is an interactive tool. It's a Google Sheet. So just go to that, click on that link, go up to File, make a copy for yourself, save that, and then you'll be able to start editing it right away. So here you can see I've got an explanation, and then we've got the 6 components down here at the bottom. They're each a different sheet. So you've got your instructions. So here's purpose. So write your purpose statement. Here's an example. So some of the things we reviewed in 101. Here's your values, shared beliefs about what's most important. Okay, so let's think about, so this is a way to interrogate your own values, list your values. Here's a link to that exercise that I just described. But what I wanted you to do is usually people have values, so evaluate them, think about them. So list your values, describe what it means, ask how, and then here's some examples. Here's how you learn more. Let me zoom out so you can see the whole sheet here. And as we go through, you go through and list these things, they will self-populate into that final sheet. So we'll say someone, I think, in the Google chat listed their values. And so we'll say, stay true. And then it should populate over here. And so if you go through the whole exercise, which you can do with your team, so you can share it out with your team, you can create your own culture canvas. And that is essentially a tool. It won't be perfect, but nothing ever is. That is the idea is to actually go through the 6 components. What are the behaviors? So what do you value? And then how do you create a behavior that connects to that? So here's an example of, right? So value 1, stay true. What's that behavior? What does it look like? And then that, an example that will be, it'll populate. And then we go through recognition, the 4 quadrants of the recognition, which is another class, rituals, and cues. And then we get to the culture canvas. So I wanted to just bring that to your attention. It's a great tool. I put a lot of energy and effort into it, and it's free. Why not use it? It's something I think that could be really useful and valuable to you guys. All right.
And I'll make sure I send that out in our follow-up. So, but
great.
Definitely access the link now so you can start building them out.
So John listed what looks to be 25 values from Chiquita. So I would say that's 20 more values than should be. So how do you remember any of those? I'm sure they're great, right? But it's I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure, John, if that was your point where you're saying like, here's all the values, there's 25 values. So I feel like we could 4 values with 24 definition statements. 4 values with 24 definition statements. Yikes. Well, I guess it depends on how you present that. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important about having a useful set of values is that you can remember them, right? You have a tool to. It is a mental tool for decision making, and if you have so many different things floating around there, it's hard to make that decision. Which is why we created that template, right? Where you have headline, hits, definition, actions, questions, right? All that stuff. When you first introduce that value, you need all that stuff. But once you learn it, you don't need that anymore when you're referring to it. And then eventually you can just get to those quick hits and just that headline. And so I feel like that's a major part of why so many organizations whiff on their values, is because they don't think about the process of learning them, internalizing them, make sure everybody's on the same page. That's I think a really, really important part of that. All right, I will stop there, take a breath. There's a lot beneath the surface of what we talked about, so I'm happy to to answer more questions. If we want to move in a particular direction, we obviously have about 25 more minutes, so I'm happy to kind of, since this is the more advanced class, I'm happy to take it in a particular direction. If they want to explore more or share some of their own values, and I can kind of in the moment respond, I think that's a possibility too.
Yeah. I guess two kind of thoughts. So if there's some initial questions, would love to take those, and then maybe if we can get a volunteer who wants to go through maybe the first component of building those values and like walk through how you would approach that component of it. So it looks like values probably aren't changed. Let's see where the question is. Rebecca, do you want to just unmute yourself and maybe ask your question?
Sure. So, hello. Hi, Josh.
Hi. Hi, Rebecca.
I was just interested in knowing, as COVID-19 has impacted the way a lot of businesses have been interacting with their customers and their employees, obviously the values shouldn't change. That should be something that can still apply and be lasting and long term. But the way that we understand how that's impacting employees and impacting organizations, our understanding of our sentiment tracking, our outreach to employees has changed in the way we interact with people. So how are you seeing different companies ensuring that they're upholding those values and in this time that they're forced to interact differently?
Right. So it is a moment of like reconsideration. And I think it's not a bad time to, just look at them and say, if not, are these still relevant? Let's assume they are. We'll talk about that in a second. But what do the behaviors now look like? What does it look like in this new world to stay gold or, harm honesty, right? Like, how are we reinterpreting those values in a way that makes sense? And I think your point is exactly like touching exactly what the challenge is, which is we've all had to change how we do our work. So maybe the definition is the same, but maybe not. And so we need to go back and look at that. I'm working with a client right now they're like, the values are good. We want to think about new ways of working, and there's some things that priorities have changed since COVID. So let's relook at that and say, how are we going to reinterpret, sharpen, and reapply these in a new way? So I think looking at that is really interesting. I'll go back to another thread, which is what values should be, like how to choose the right value, the right thing to focus on. And what I really believe deeply is that there's a lot of important behaviors. There's a lot of things that we care about. Values, because we have a limited number of spots, they should be about the things that we are stretching towards or would like to stretch towards, that we're working on. So for example, we had a client who were just terrific at diversity and inclusion. Like, they were industry leaders. And when we were working with them on their values, they were like, well, of course, one of them is going to be diversity, right? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if it is. And it wasn't. It was a part of one of them, but it wasn't as important because they had already basically internalized and metabolized, to go back to the organism metaphor, that concept. So you know what? We have some other things that we want to be working on. And so I would tie that back to COVID. We're changing. Maybe there's some things we need to prioritize and reprioritize. So we're going to swap out one of our values. Now, you don't want to do it too much, right? It's whiplash, but it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to take a moment and say, what does it mean? Like, what are we doing now? Like, what does my life look like now? What does our organization look like now in COVID? And I would even argue now we need to start thinking about post-COVID. And what does it mean? Because everything has changed. What do we want our organization and behaviors to look like after we are able to get through this? Because now would be the perfect time to start to think about how to implement those changes. Awesome question, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question and the great answer. So I had a private question come in, was in terms of value and culture recognition, what's your comments on monetary and non-monetary recognition?
Yeah, so we touched on it briefly in 101, which is I am totally against extrinsic motivators. And extrinsic motivators include cash prizes, big screen TVs, trips to the Bahamas. Those are things that people will cheat to get, or at the very least, you're sending the wrong message. Like, it's not like, oh, you have to do this thing, so I'm going to pay you. It's, hey, this is something that's going to benefit everyone. And the recognition should really be around, should be other types of gifts, right? So it can be in a gift of attention. It could even be a gift, if you're an extrovert, a gift of recognition amongst friends. An introvert, that's punishment. So you got to think about something else. It is, I had talked about maybe lunch with a manager. It could be, you can donate money to an organization. I'm going to give you some money to donate to an organization. You get a day off to volunteer. So what is the symbol? What is the thing that you're trying to articulate in your rewards and recognition? A coffee card, it's fine, right? It's like $25, it's appreciated. But honestly, the pat on the back is just as appreciated. And so that's how you wanna. It can be a stupid trophy, right? It's just a trophy that gets passed around, not even one that you get caught up, that you keep. In the book, I talk about the bacon pillow, and how there was one organization that essentially they just peer-to-peer were like, hey, someone brought in a pillow that looked like bacon. I don't know where they got it. Who cares? It's like, I'm now giving it to you, recognizing that you did a great job, and everybody goes, hey, nice work. It's fun, and it's not about the gift, it's about what you're rewarding. So that's my very, very specific reaction to monetary rewards.
I'm going to give a plug to one of our local entrepreneurs and part of Culture Lab X, Anna Strauss's Spark platform is all about recognition and making it curated for your particular employees, and recognizing, I think the example that's most resonant is the extrovert being, recognized out in front of people. Whereas if you did that with an introvert, they'd be like, that was the worst.
Worst thing ever.
It was
don't do that.
You basically said, don't do that good work anymore, because that. So definitely check out her platform called Spark if you're building a company. It's a great way to have recognition for your employees.
So we have Jesse just put it in the chat. Thanks, Jesse.
So we have I'm happy however you want to go with it. We have one person who put some of their it looks like a attempt at some values and some behaviors, and then we have one question. Do you want to take the question and then maybe explore that example?
Yeah. Let's do the question.
So the question is, what are the HR office support actions to implement values in a company?
Oh yeah. Oof. Well, okay. So the two parts, right? So are we? I'm going to take your question at face value, which is implement values. To create values is going to require more. Is going to require an executive sponsor and a lot of political capital and will to actually do it, because it requires a lot of rethink. So if we're thinking about implementation, well, we've got to think about behaviors, and you've got to think about defining those. So the first thing is the definition. But I was on a call with some HR leaders yesterday, and what they said was the question they asked amongst themselves, and then we discussed, was what is the first thing that you can do as an HR staffer to actually improve the culture? And their answer was to start to think about implementing rewards and recognition. And it's that, I think that's a great answer, because, and it answers your question as well, because remember, what you're going to do is you're going to reward values-driven behaviors. You make that very clear. And rewards and recognition often owned by HR. And you can start small. You can do it even in HR, and think about, what are the little things you can do to get to reward and recognize. You don't have to ask anybody's permission to give a bacon pillow. You don't have to ask anybody's permission to start to recognize your peers or have your manager understand with your manager that. So once you get clear on your values, implementation is about awareness, understanding, and integration. So if you can get people to start to understand what those are, and even if you don't, if you're rewarding these things consistently, people are going to go, why did they get the thing? Right? I didn't understand there. And that could be a way of creating that awareness. And they can go, that's interesting that they are doing that for that. I didn't know. Do we have values? And they look it up on the internet. Oh, we do have values, right? Like that could be a nice way to kind of backdoor it. So hopefully I think I'm answering your question there about implementation, but it's a relevant one, right? What can I do? I'm not the CEO. I don't know, like what am I going to do to change the culture of the organization?
So this one kind of came up on the 101 session, but how frequent should culture rituals and recognition be conducted?
All the time. Rituals and recognition can happen all the time. Small recognition things within the within your team. There is the annual big reward, the CEO award or banquet or whatever. But when we're thinking about rituals and recognition, there's all different types, and you can read about it in the book. 4 different types of recognition, 4 different types of rituals, and 4 different types of cues. And so those should be happening all the time, small and big, different textures of that. Because what you want to be doing is you want to be reinforcing values all the time, right? At the end of every meeting, hey, I want to recognize Jared. Thanks for being there for me, buddy. You were doing hashtag whatever value, right? Like that's what we want. And so that's what I would recommend. Small things a lot, often. That's what you got to be, to really get the pace going in that direction.
You're welcome, by the way, Josh. No problem.
Yeah, man. You were great. Thanks.
So there's no more questions, just the comments from Per Nordahl, who put some examples of, I think, what they're working on. So not sure what the best approach for maybe tackling those would be for our time here, if you wanted to use them as an example.
I can give some context if you want.
Yes, Per. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, Per, just why don't you tell us what you got here?
Okay, so the first sentence here is we are evolving and curious. That's their value, and the 4 points beneath there is sort of their description of that value. It's not the behavior. We're working on the behaviors next week, so we've gotten through to the first 2 points, and the thing is, this is an organization with about 40 people, right?
Okay.
So we had first of all the management group, where we established the vision of what we want to become, and then we did, for the values bit, we split it in 3. So we had everyone involved. So we had one with the administration/leadership, one with mid-management, and then we had a group of 10 of the last 30 come together. But then we had all the rest participate in a survey where we offered up 100 values for them to choose by what they felt was present at the moment, important for them personally, and what they felt was important for the organization for the future. And we put that together, and what we ended up then was basically 3 sets of values. So which was, I think, altogether 13. And then we took that together, ended up with 3 values, but with a couple of underpoints to understand what they meant.
That's exactly right. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we do when we do our workshops. We'll gather a group of all-stars, let's say 12 all-stars in a company of a couple hundred, and everybody will kind of go, blah, here's all the stuff, and it's just a bunch of sticky notes all over the wall, right? And then you say, all right, well, let's group them kind of like here and here, and then you go, these kind of fit together. What is this? What if we put these 2 together? What does that mean? So that sounds like what you did, which is exactly the process. It sounds great. So your value, the top line, the title is "We are evolving and are curious." Is that correct?
Yeah, that's Google Translate for you, but yeah.
Perfect. That's excellent. All right, so that makes sense. That's good. And then what I'm missing here are like the 3 quick hits. What's my quick way in? But you've kind of given us the narrative, right? So we share and value each other's expertise internally with customers. Okay, great. So that's about curiosity is being interpreted as connections and listening in that way, I think. And we dare to be both good and humble. Interesting. Yeah.
It's talking about owning your own competency, but at the same time staying humble.
Well, I guess to me, it's like, okay, so how is that? I guess maybe that fits into evolving, or that's about pushing the edge of curious, right? Like, how does that story tell? Like, I'm looking for a way to connect that story, We develop ourselves and our systems within the framework that applies at all times. Okay, I'm reverse Google translating. We celebrate new products and let ourselves be inspired and dare to test new ideas. And we learn from each other at different task documents. So yeah, great. I can see that's great that you tried to pack that all in. I think there needs to be and maybe it reads differently in English, right? It sounds like it does a little bit, but there could be a little more work in the synthesis of the concept, because now I'm like, what is this really about? When we're saying evolving and curious, what is what's the core idea? Because these are kind of, I can see dotted lines between them, yeah, but not like makes real, sense.
Because that's also what I wanted to ask you about, because earlier, as you were sort of talking about how you develop values, it felt very much top down. And so when you have an organization like this with 40 people, if they don't own it, you've lost. That's my opinion, at least.
Yes. Oh, 100%. For sure. So what I didn't underscore it enough, but the way that we make this work, the only way that we make this work with large organizations is we get all stars together. So these are people that the executives have nominated and the rank and file trust and believe in. So when we have these people involved in the process, we're able to better get at the actual answers and what feels true, not to the leaders, but to the employees and the peers. And then we build in that buy-in process into, they step out and they say, look, this is part of, we did this cross-functionally, and this is how we think about it. I don't think it's a bad idea to have put it out there for everybody and get some, get answers in a survey and start to think about, getting some data, but that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? You kind of have there's kind of the executive mandate, and then there's the senior leaders, and you got to go, all right, how does this all fit together, right? And that's kind of the art of it as well. So I would 100% agree with you, because years ago I would do it, just with the leaders or just myself, and it wouldn't work because it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't even matter what the leaders say, right? It's really kind of is what it really to take hold. It's got to be what the employees believe are the things that we're working on. And the great thing is, because those leaders said, I trust these people, when these people come back and say, here they are, they will say, oh, pretty good. Maybe I'll tweak this and this, but there you go. You're really close. And so I think that's great. And I appreciate the way that you think about it. So good, thanks. I appreciate it, Per. Thank you for engaging. I'm excited to hear what the behaviors end up with. You can shoot me a note on LinkedIn, okay? All right, Cameron. Questions? More questions? We got 5 more minutes. Is there anything else that we wanna cover before we wrap it up?
So I think we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I did get kicked out because of my internet, so I lost my chat. So if someone had a question, feel free to send it to me or unmute yourself right now, and before we come to a close. So maybe one or 2 more questions.
The last thing I saw was yours. I could go for some whiteboard stickies and Teams.
Yeah, that's all.
Days.
I know. When you brought that up, I was like, oh, I could just go for that. We have this great space to do that as a team.
Yep. Right now it's Google Slides. All right. Final
Awesome.
call. You got 5 minutes left for a free lightning consultation. Who's got a question?
All right, I got one. So do you have time to share the 4 quadrants of recognition, rewards, or cues? So I think there was one of those. It was one of those.
Yes, let's do one. Let's do recognition, because I think it's so on people's minds. It's such an important one. Okay. Again, in the book, on the blog, it's all, I think you have, is it coming up?
Yep, you're good. There you go.
All right, great. All right, so here are the 4 quadrants of recognition. I've got it arranged in the X and Y axis, okay? So it goes from formal to informal and leadership to peers. And so what that means is, in the top left corner is formal and from leaders. So the kind of recognition we're talking about here is the one that everybody's familiar with. Sales team, the annual banquet, the CEO award, right? That happens once a year. It's expensive, it gets people together, and it's highly visible. Great. That's the one we're all familiar with. Okay, now let's go to formal peer-to-peer. So when I talk about formal, I mean the organization supports it and it happens regularly. So this is going to be the kind of platform, usually these days, it's usually like a kind of digital platform. So Spark is a good example of this. How do you formalize peer-to-peer recognition? I've heard about jelly beans. People have jars, and then you put your jelly bean in if you want to recognize somebody for a certain something. Maybe it's one color, or maybe it's multiple colors. I suggest little flags or sticky notes you can put on people's desks. Now in pandemic, it's thanking people on in a Slack channel and hashtag. There's even, I have a client that is even, they have a plugin that tracks when people add the hashtag of one of the values, and then that person that they've rewarded, actually that comes up on their annual review. So that's a pretty cool little thing. So formal peer-to-peer, informal peer-to-peer. So this is the bacon pillow. So your team, someone just brings in some tchotchke and says, all right, this week, every week on Fridays, we're going to recognize, a different person on the team for whatever it is. And you say, thank you for doing this for me this week. I want to acknowledge it. It was a hard week. So you can give them a GIF, right? Digitally, some sort of recognition to just say, this is what I want to do. So informal, company's not sponsoring it, super low key. And then finally, informal lead from leaders. So this is this is a symbol for taking somebody out to coffee. So as a manager, take someone out, sit with them on a Zoom call, take a few minutes, say, hey, thank you so much for putting that in, putting in the extra effort, hashtag whatever the value is. This was really great, and I super appreciate it, right? So it could be a coffee card, could be going to coffee or lunch. Buy me lunch, I'm yours forever. So that is kind of this informal recognition from leaders. So my aspiration for all of you is that you can have a little bit in each one of these categories. You're working on it. And one of the tools, one of the evaluation tools I have in the book is essentially going through and saying, okay, whatever all your recognition programs, now sort them by quadrant. Are there any quadrants that are naked, that have nothing? That's the one that you should start on. What should you, how do you start to implement this? How do you encourage a team leader to do an informal peer-to-peer recognition or rewards thing? Like, what does that look like? Guide them, and then they can create it themselves.
Awesome. Well, that brings us right to time. So you nailed it on the timing there. So I will be brief. So we're out at 1:30, but want to give you a virtual round of applause. I know it's never an easy thing, but thank you so much for coming in and doing 2 workshops with us. It was such a pleasure to learn from you, and such a great resource for our community to learn further about culture. And I know that that's something near and dear to our founder, as you heard earlier. So he was excited that we had this workshop and look forward to working with you in the future. And thank you all for hopping on this afternoon or whatever time zone you're in. We appreciate you joining and plugging into to this workshop. So the one last thing is, this evening we have a terrific panel discussion on the future of women-led innovation and entrepreneurship. It's a panel discussion that we've partnered with Fourth Wave, which is a women-led technology accelerator. So you'll hear from our amazing female founders. So Anna Strauss is actually one of those in the cohort. It'll be a really wonderful conversation. So definitely check that out. And we look forward to seeing you throughout the week. And thank you again, Josh, and have a terrific rest of your week. So we'll see you later.